Let me start by saying this is something I did not expect. This device could very well be my favorite of 2022. Now don't confuse this with the best device because of course, based on how much you'd want to spend, there are far better, more achieved solutions than this one, but this little Anbernic RG35XX does so many things right. Now before we jump further, let me address the fact that I do not own a Miyoo Mini. I considered it and tried to buy one, but it was sold out. Now the RG35XX on the other hand was a very smooth experience. The point I'm making here is that there may be reasons why the Miyoo Mini might be better, I wouldn't know. So I'm judging the RG35XX from the angle that I do not have its main competitor to compare it with. With that said, it is not my first entry-level retro device and how far we've come. When I look back at those devices, it is night and day in two very specific things: their cohesiveness and ease of use. But first, let's talk specs. Now, the RG35XX has three color options. The one I have, gray modeled after the Famicom, a translucent white, and a translucent purple, which, going by screenshots, looks to be quite pale. I'd say lilac. It has a rather beautiful 3.5-inch IPS display, OCA laminated, and a 640 by 480 resolution. That's a 228 ppi and a 4:3 aspect ratio. It has 5 levels of brightness, which offers a great spectrum, though I would have preferred for it to be manually adjustable. It has a quad-core ARM Cortex-A9 CPU, which so happens to be the same CPU that was found in PSP, and for its GPU, a quad-core PowerVR SGX 544MP. Often paired with ARM-based CPUs, it's a rather universal and versatile chip that has been around for nearly a decade. Then a DDR3 256 megabytes of RAM. It is sold by default with a 64 gigabyte micro SD that contains all the necessary files and some questionably provided ROMs. It uses Linux as its operating system and wraps it all in a closed source nifty little wrapped package. So you'll come to understand that this device is not sporting cutting edge technology, but I guess that sometimes the wrapping does make the present. From where I stand, this is a well-matured product. It has a single port speaker, which I was pleasantly surprised with, and for the eras that this device pushes, it's more than enough in terms of volume and sound reproduction. You do have a second microSD expansion slot to add games, which Anbernic offers 128 gigabytes filled with extra ROMs if you wish to pay the difference. 2100 milliamp hour battery lasting 5 hours. Now, my tests showed me otherwise when playing more demanding titles. Tekken 3 ran for 2 hours and 52 minutes on full brightness, full audio, and full battery, which I'm pretty happy with. What I'm less happy about is the sleeping mode, which every time I set it, I would come back to a dead battery, as it depletes just as if it stayed open. So I strongly recommend against it, but should you have the device, let me know if yours behaves any differently. As for when it is powered off, I left it sitting for about 5 days and came back to approximately 30% battery left. That from which was originally 100% when shutting it down a few days prior. It sports a vibration motor which you will most likely never use outside of the test program and very few PS1 games. A mini HDMI out, a USB-C slot for charging, and a 3.5mm jack. It claims to support 2.4 GHz wireless gamepads, but I have yet to see that in settings, so don't get your hopes up on that claim. Rather, I think the manufacturer hints that their OS supports plug-and-play drivers for dongles, which provide 2.4 GHz controller capability. With that said, I can confirm that a wired DualSense gamepad does work, but the button layout is off. I'll put a snapshot of all the different systems that this device supports right about here, out of the box. It goes for $56 US minus shipping for the 1 micro SD configuration, and for $15 US more, they add the extra 128 gigabytes second micro SD, which according to Anbernic will give you approximately 3,000 plus more ROMs. And the product box, which Anbernic calls a gift, by the way, was a screen protector that once installed covered the screen and left about 1mm of bezel unprotected, which I'm perfectly okay with, a Type-C charging cable, and a user manual. This device is a small form factor at slightly under 12 centimeters in length and slightly over 8 centimeters in width, with 2 centimeters at its thickest and weighs 165 grams. From the screenshots I've seen, it still is not as small as the Miu Mini. It uses a vertical form factor and all the buttons you'd expect, but analog sticks are there. You also have a menu button, a reset, and a power button, the latter of which also serves to operate the non-working sleep mode, unless you are plugged in, of course. Now that the specs are covered, why do I love this device so much? Well, for one, it's comfortable to hold, and I think a lot of that has to do with its orientation. It gets mildly warm when taxing the unit to its full potential, so no concerns there. In comparison, I'm working on reviews for both the Anbernic RG3505 and the Retro Pocket 3 Plus, and I can say that I cramped with both after a short time. I never did using the RG35XX. I do have to adopt this weird grip where I intertwine my fingers and go full thumb mode. And mere seconds later, I just forget about it and go ham. The D-pad is overall good, if not flawless. I find the corner to be a little too sharp. Something more rounded might have been better for finding games in general, but for every other use, it is responsive, has a good amount of stiffness, and is not too small. I expect that once it is broken in a tad more, Shoryukens might be a little easier to pull every single time. The shoulder buttons have okay placement. There's been better, but those buttons are also not going to be the ones you push the most. They used tactile switches, but everything else at the front of the device is rubber dome, which feels exactly like a retro controller would. Once again, Anbernic delivers great controls overall. It is of great build quality, especially at that price point. The plastic feels premium with a bit of texture, and thankfully there's no obnoxious, bold, bright branding on the front of the device. But the main thing really is that, well, it's very simple. I don't think there's a single person out there that will disagree with the following. This market is flooded with a plethora of devices. Some are good, some are downright nasty, but most of them claim to do something that they have no business doing. And nearly all of them try to be far more than what they're supposed to be. A music player, a movie player, a retro gaming console, a this, a that. And that, I find, creates a convoluting experience for the end user, leaving us obliged to rely on communities to make the device we buy into an actual satisfying working product. Now, truth be told, it sure is part of the fun. The first, the second, heck, even the third time. But when it's been the last 12 devices that you keep tweaking only to forget once the new shiny toy comes out, it gets exhausting. And this is precisely why I love the RG35XX. And yes, there will still be a community making these devices better over time. Just a few days ago, I saw a Retro Gamecore video in my feed covering, I believe, Garlic OS from Black Seraph. And that's amazing news, but not everyone wishes to bother, because within a year's time, there will be a better device to jump on. So my wish right here, right now, is to have a device that out of the box just works so that I can play a few classics from childhood and move on. Now, don't get me wrong, the RG35XX is far from perfect, and there are some missing features that I find are just plain weird. For example, you can't change Game Boy emulation from gray tones to green tones to mimic the real thing. Although the 4:3 aspect ratio is best for this device, you still don't have the option to go 3:2 in places where it'd be best, like Game Boy Advance. But when it comes to powering this little device and just playing, that it does, and it does amazingly well. I challenge you to find half a dozen titles that do not play well on this device. I personally couldn't, and I certainly clocked a few hours on it already. It doesn't have analog sticks, but it also simply does not need them. And this is a decision from Anbernic that I wholeheartedly welcome. These devices unfairly gets released and leave all the work to community developers to make them good. It's so refreshing to see a device being released with no false advertisement, no make-believes that it'll run Dreamcast games when clearly it's not built for that. And while the options are indeed on the slimmer side of things, at least whatever is there never fails to work as it should. And then there are little clever tweaks that are done. For example, when playing in vertical arcade titles, your D-pad orientation is adjusted accordingly. Your volume buttons suddenly become playable inputs. and your shoulder buttons become more useful. Again, do I miss options like 2 times the speed acceleration? I sure do. Would I love to have a shortcut to quickly save and load states? It sure wouldn't hurt. But what it lacks in customization, it gains in cohesiveness. I'm sure we all realize that the Super NES collection was a major step back from all the options you have in retro arch nowadays. Yet, these throwback devices were all the rage, and I think this is a perfect example that sometimes less is more. And when I play with my RG35XX, this is exactly what I'm getting in terms of experience. That sometimes less is indeed more, and just like the most basic comfort food dish, complexity is not always the key to success. Sometimes it just needs to be done with a certain level of care. Now, why is that important? Well, let's go into personal opinion territory. I think Anbernic was in somewhat of a fall from grace stance as of late, and some of the devices they proposed lacked exactly that, cohesiveness and ease of use. And sure, not everyone will appreciate that Anbernic is clearly cashing in on the success of the Miu Mini, but if it's done well, and it gives me the opportunity to buy the devices I please, what's the issue, right? I don't think there's one. And so when all that is put together at a price that most people can afford, I'm glad that Anbernic did decide to cash in on it, but a part of me thinks that really they did their best on releasing a device that just works. So let's have a quick recap. What flows and what doesn't. It's very affordable and offers great performance for the asking price. From the buttons to the mono speaker, this product feels like quality. The plastic, the color, every retro handheld I've owned in that price point was considerably cheaper in quality. Now, this is not. The screen is lovely and shows no signs of misbehavior, which at that price point is often lacking. I'm mainly surprised by the pixel response time. I have no way to benchmark these, but there's no blur or ghosting at all, and the colors are vibrant. As far as I'm concerned, this device punches higher than its weight class when it comes to comfort. Enough said. As a low-powered device, it means great battery life at nearly 3 hours on a full charge playing a demanding title. I'm not concerned about ever running out of battery on this device. The small unit showcases the experience Anbernic acquired over time and the level of design that they've held themselves accountable to. Alright, so what I like less with this device? Well, first, I was hesitant on this one, but I will say this much. If this is what we can expect in terms of closed OS, and that these companies keep improving on the software front of things, this just might stop being a negative in the future. But let's just say that there are many steps made in the right direction with this closed OS. But all things considered, it is a negative. But until then, it does lack options. Even some that are super basic that makes you wonder just how it didn't make the cut. With sleep mode not working, of all the features that do not work properly or do not exist, this is the one thing that holds this device back the most. At a price point this low, this would be an amazing device to keep in a car's glove box, as an example. But having to remember to charge it ahead of time every time is a bummer. I hope this review was informative enough and that whatever information you were looking for on this device was successfully addressed in this review. Now, let me know in the comments down below, as I'd love to know your thoughts on the Anbernic RG35XX. Have you bought your own? Are you on the fence? Do you have a Miu Mini? If so, which one do you prefer? Oh, and if you enjoyed this video and still haven't decided on it, how about transforming your previous Android phone into an amazing retro handheld? In which case, I might have a controller to recommend if you're willing to look past a few disappointments.